What does it truly mean to think like a king? Beyond crowns and thrones lies a deeper mastery, the ability to lead with wisdom, command with purpose, and rule first over oneself. Drawing from the profound insights of Carl Jung, this journey into the psychology of the king will show you how to awaken true power from within and why the world desperately needs your leadership now. Carl Jung, one of the great explorers of the human psyche, believed that the figure of the king holds profound psychological significance. The king is more than a political leader or historical monarch. He is an archetype, a timeless image of order, vision, and inner authority that exists deep within the collective unconscious. To think like a king, then, is not about dominating others, but about mastering oneself. Jung teaches that the mind of a true king is not swayed by impulse or pride. Instead, it is a mind shaped by deep introspection, emotional balance, and an unwavering commitment to a higher purpose. The king archetype embodies not only power but also wisdom, two forces that must work together to create lasting influence and authentic leadership. This journey into the psychology of the king is an invitation to step beyond shallow notions of power. It challenges us to explore how we can think with greater clarity, act with greater authority, and live with greater purpose. In a world where many grasp for power without understanding its true nature, the psychology of the king offers a different path, one grounded in mastery of the self. As we explore Jung's insights, we will uncover the secret behind the king's strength, the importance of confronting the shadow, and the way true purpose anchors decision-making. This is not merely a study of leadership, it is a guide to living with vision, courage, and integrity. It is an invitation to awaken the king within. When most people think of power, they imagine control, the ability to bend others to their will, to command obedience, to dominate. But Carl Jung saw true power very differently. For Jung, real power was not about external domination, it was about internal mastery. Jung believed that the psyche was divided between the conscious mind, the part we know, and the unconscious, the vast, unseen forces within us. Among these unconscious forces is the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, fear, or repress. Left unchecked, the shadow can sabotage us from within, projecting chaos and conflict outward into our lives. Thus, the king who seeks only to control others is always vulnerable to being controlled by his own unseen darkness. Without confronting his shadow, his power becomes brittle, reactive, and ultimately self-destructive. True power, Jung argued, comes from integration. It arises when a person faces their shadow honestly, acknowledges their fears, weaknesses, and darker impulses, and brings them into conscious awareness. The king who has integrated his shadow rules himself first, and thus rules his world with authentic authority. This kind of power is stable because it is rooted not in fear, but in understanding. It is not threatened by challenges because it does not depend on external validation. It is quiet, firm, and enduring. Emotional balance is another key. A king must not be a slave to anger, lust, fear, or pride. These emotions, when left unchecked, distort perception and cloud judgment. The king who reacts impulsively is no king at all. He is a prisoner of his own emotions. Jung's vision of power invites us to see leadership not as a quest for control over others, but as a deepening of control over oneself. Power is not the roar of the lion. It is the silent, unshakable presence of the mountain. The king who thinks with true power sees beyond the moment. He does not need to prove his strength because he knows who he is. And that knowledge, hard-won through introspection, courage, and inner reconciliation, becomes a force that cannot be easily broken. Within Jung's vast map of the human psyche, the king stands as one of the central archetypes, a symbol of order, vision, and sacred leadership. But the king is far more than a figurehead who rules with power. He is the embodiment of wisdom, fairness, and purpose. The true king archetype harmonizes two seemingly opposite forces, authority and compassion. He holds the power to command and enforce, but he also governs with an eye toward justice, growth, and the flourishing of his kingdom, whether that kingdom is a nation, a company, a family, or his own inner world. A king who acts without wisdom becomes a tyrant. A king who seeks wisdom but shirks authority becomes ineffectual. The archetype demands the balance of both. Jung saw this balance as essential for psychic wholeness, not just for leaders, but for anyone seeking mastery over their lives. King represents the principle of order against chaos. His presence stabilizes, nurtures, and gives life meaning. Without the king energy active within us, we drift, overwhelmed by the competing demands of life, unable to act with vision or purpose. Importantly, the king is not static. His authority is renewed through constant self-examination and service to something greater than himself. He listens deeply to the needs of his people, or his responsibilities, and adapts, evolves, and grows. Stagnation is death for the king. In the Jungian psychology, activating the king archetype within ourselves means stepping into responsibility, not just for external roles, but for the inner structure of our lives. It means leading ourselves wisely, setting boundaries, making decisions with courage, and committing to our vision even in the face of adversity. To embody the king is to walk a path of inner sovereignty. It is to become the ruler of your own destiny, acting with dignity, insight, and a steady hand. It is to be a source of life, order, and meaning in a world that often drifts toward confusion and chaos. Every king has a shadow, and the greater the king's light, the darker his shadow can become. Jung taught that the shadow is composed of everything we reject, deny, or refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. It contains our fears, rage, greed, cruelty, and vulnerabilities. The king who refuses to face his shadow inevitably projects it outward, creating enemies where there are none, ruling through fear instead of wisdom, and falling victim to pride and corruption. The unchecked shadow manifests in two primary ways for the king: the tyrant and the weakling. The tyrant seeks to crush dissent, to dominate, to rule through terror. Beneath the facade of invincibility, he is driven by deep insecurity and fear of being overthrown. The weakling, on the other hand, abdicates responsibility, avoids hard decisions, and allows chaos to reign due to his fear of conflict and failure. Both are distorted expressions of the king archetype, rooted in a failure to confront and integrate the shadow. The path of true kingship demands that the king must descend into his own darkness. He must face the parts of himself he would rather not. See the selfishness, the anger, the fear of inadequacy. Only by confronting these forces can he prevent them from ruling him in secret. Integration does not mean acting out the shadow. It means recognizing it, owning it, and finding constructive ways to channel its energy. Rage, when acknowledged and mastered, becomes righteous anger against injustice. Fear, when faced, becomes caution and prudence. Ambition, when purified, becomes a drive for meaningful achievement rather than selfish gain. This descent into the shadow is often painful. It requires humility, the willingness to admit weakness, and immense courage, the strength to endure what one finds. Yet without it, the king is doomed to be either a monster or a pawn of his own unconscious drives. History offers countless examples of rulers who fell because they refused to confront their own inner demons. But it also offers rare examples of those who ruled wisely precisely because they had fought and won their inner battles. In your own life, the shadow work of the king means examining your fears, your hidden resentments, your secret desires for power or revenge. It means asking, where am I not honest with myself? Where do I fear losing control? Where am I ruled by my emotions instead of my purpose? The king's true power is born not from denying the shadow, but from embracing it, bringing it into the light of consciousness, integrating its lessons and ruling over it with clarity and strength. A king's decisions shape the destiny of his kingdom. In Jungian psychology, The act of decision-making is not merely a rational process. It is an expression of the king's will and vision. To decide is to cut away the unnecessary, to commit to a path, to bear the burden of consequence. Indecision is the enemy of the king. It creates confusion, saps authority, and weakens the entire realm. But powerful decision-making is not impulsive. It is rooted in deep reflection. A true king does not act rashly out of fear or pride. He listens, both, to the counsel of trusted voices and to the deeper whispers of his own intuition. He weighs the facts but also considers the broader impact. How will this decision affect the kingdom, the future, the soul of those he serves? Jung emphasized the importance of the inner voice, the self, the deepest core of the psyche that speaks through symbols, dreams, and intuition. A king who has attuned himself to this voice can make decisions that align with a greater purpose, even when they are difficult or unpopular. Moreover, the king acts with clarity. Once a decision is made, he commits fully. Half-hearted actions betray the king's authority and invite rebellion, whether from external forces or from the internal forces of doubt and fear. The strength of the king's will does not come from stubbornness, but from alignment. When decisions arise from a place of inner coherence, where mind, heart, and spirit agree, the king's authority becomes unshakable. In your life, thinking like a king means cultivating the discipline of decision. It means learning to trust your deeper wisdom, to weigh your options with care and to commit with full force once the path is chosen. It also means accepting responsibility. A true king does not blame others when things go wrong. He owns his choices, learns from his failures, and remains focused on the vision that guides him. The power of decision is the power to shape reality. The king's will is the bridge between vision and manifestation. A king without a vision is a king without a kingdom. Carl Jung believed that leadership, and indeed the very essence of the king archetype, must be rooted in purpose. Without a guiding star, the king becomes reactive, swayed by the moods of the crowd, the fear of enemies, or the temptations of personal gain. But with purpose, the king becomes a beacon, offering stability, hope, and direction. Purpose gives meaning to the king's power. It transforms authority from mere control into service. It shifts leadership from domination into inspiration. A king's purpose is never selfish. It is connected to something larger than himself, the flourishing of his people, the stability of his domain, the realization of a higher ideal. Jung saw this as critical. When a leader acts only for personal ego, the archetype becomes corrupted, and the kingdom, whether literal or psychological, begins to crumble. Vision demands sacrifice. It requires patience and discipline. It often demands that the king make hard choices, not for immediate gratification but for the long-term good. Leading with vision means seeing beyond the momentary crises and temptations. It means asking, what kind of world am I building? What legacy will I leave? In our own lives, the psychology of the king calls us to define our personal purpose clearly. What are you ruling for? What is the mission that gives meaning to your daily actions, your struggles, your victories? Purpose turns ordinary existence into a kingdom. It gives you the strength to endure setbacks, the wisdom to say no to distractions, and the power to inspire others to rise to their best selves. A king who leads with vision does not merely respond to life, he shapes it. He becomes a source of hope, clarity, and strength for all who follow. Even the greatest kings can fall, and their fall is rarely caused by external enemies. More often, it is the inner loss of purpose that triggers their downfall. Carl Jung warned that when a leader loses connection to his inner truth, he becomes vulnerable to the worst forces within and without. Without a clear vision, the king becomes prey to fear, pride, greed, and resentment. The kingdom falls into chaos, not because the enemies were too strong, but because the king forgot why he ruled in the first place. History is filled with tragic examples. Rulers who began with noble ideals but over time surrendered to luxury, paranoia, or tyranny. The initial flame of vision flickered and died, replaced by ego-driven decisions and reactive governance. The fall often begins subtly, small compromises of integrity, a growing obsession with image over substance, a willingness to silence critical voices. Over time, the king isolates himself from reality, living in an echo chamber where only his desires matter. The Jungian shadow, once ignored or suppressed, grows in the dark, ultimately seizing control. The tyrant, the weakling, or the paranoid ruler emerges, destroying the kingdom from within. For the individual, the fall of the king archetype manifests as a loss of direction, meaninglessness, depression, or destructive behavior. Without purpose, life feels hollow. Without a vision, decisions become reactive and chaotic. The antidote is continual renewal. The king must return again and again to his inner source of purpose. He must resist the temptation to rest on old victories or to hide from uncomfortable truths. He must remain a servant of the vision, not a slave to his ego. Only by constantly realigning with his deeper purpose can the king avoid the slow drift into ruin. The lesson is clear. True power and true leadership demands vigilance, not against external threats, but against the internal erosion of meaning and integrity. The crown does not make the king. True kingship is forged within. Carl Jung's Psychology of the King teaches us that authentic leadership, whether over a kingdom, a career, a family, or simply one's own life, begins with self-mastery. It is not about dominating others, but about confronting and integrating the forces within, the light and the shadow, the ambition and the fear, the vision and the vulnerability. The king who thinks with true power is not ruled by emotion, ego, or the need for approval. He acts from clarity, rooted in a deep understanding of himself and a steadfast commitment to a higher purpose. His power is silent, steady, and unshakable. Mastering the mind of a king means embracing responsibility. It means standing firm in the face of chaos. It means listening deeply to the voice of vision, even when the world demands compromise. It means fighting the daily battles against fear, apathy, and ego, and emerging stronger, wiser, and more whole. This journey is not easy. It requires courage, reflection, and discipline, but it is the path of true sovereignty, the path of those who refuse to live small, reactive lives and instead rise to the calling of greatness. You are invited to walk that path. In your own life, awaken the king within. Think with power and purpose. Rule your inner kingdom with wisdom and strength. Become the source of order, meaning, and vision, not just for yourself, but for all those whose lives you touch. The world needs true kings, and the king you seek is already within you.